Welcome, my cheerful friends. If today's joke made you smile, click that subscribe button. It's a small gesture that guarantees more jokes, just like this one. Don't miss last one that is special joke for you. In the quiet courtyard of a mental institution, two patients were enjoying a sunny afternoon, engaged in what seemed to be a lighthearted conversation. They had been there for a while discussing various topics when suddenly one of them, let's call him Jack, turned to his companion and asked, "Hey, what day were you born on?" The second patient, whom we'll call Mike, thought for a moment and then replied confidently, "I was born on a Sunday." Jack looked at Mike with a skeptical expression, his brow furrowing as he processed the answer. For a few seconds he seemed deep in thought, his face gradually breaking into a wide grin. Then, without warning, he burst out laughing, almost doubling over with amusement. "Ha ha! You're trying to fool me, aren't you?" Jack exclaimed between fits of laughter. "Everybody knows that Sunday is a holiday." 27. A poultry farm owner was on the hunt for a new employee, someone trustworthy to help manage the daily operations. He knew that the job required not just hard work, but also a great deal of honesty. After all, he had heard enough stories about workers sneaking off with eggs, and he wanted to avoid any such problems. One day, a man walked into the farm office, eager to apply for the job. He looked honest enough, but the owner knew appearances could be deceiving. So, after exchanging pleasantries, the owner got straight to the point. "Before we proceed," the owner began, "I need to know something very important. How can I be sure that you won't steal any eggs from my farm?" The candidate, who had clearly anticipated such a question, responded without missing a beat. "Sir, you can rest assured about my honesty. Let me tell you something about my past that might help ease your worries." The owner raised an eyebrow, curious to hear what the man had to say. "For 3 years," the candidate continued, "I worked at a bathhouse, and not once did I take a bath." 28. In a cozy hotel room, a blonde woman was chatting with her friend about her recent frustrations. "I'm telling you, this mobile is going to make me go broke," she declared, shaking her head in exasperation. Her friend looked at her curiously and asked, "Why on earth would that be?" The blonde sighed deeply and explained, "Well, the other day, my phone kept saying battery low, so I figured I needed to do something about it. I've already gone through 10 batteries trying to fix it." Two women recently started learning how to drive and were eager to share their progress with their husbands. One evening, as the husbands met up, one of them said, "I don't know what's gotten into my wife lately. Every night she grabs the bed and starts saying, 'First gear, second gear.' It's like she's still practicing her driving moves even in her sleep." The other husband laughed and replied, "That's nothing compared to what's happening at my house. Every night my wife spreads her legs and keeps saying, 'Put in $10 worth of gas.'" 30. In a packed courtroom, the air was thick with tension as the defense attorney prepared to deliver his final argument. This was a high-stakes case, and the lawyer, known for his cunning, was determined to win at any cost. He stood up confidently, addressing the judge with a polished tone. "Your Honor, I stand before you today to assert that my client is innocent of all charges. And, as proof, I refer you to page 15 of the law book, which clearly states that my client should be honorably acquitted." The judge, a seasoned man with years of experience, raised an eyebrow. "Page 15, you say? Very well. Let's have a look at this crucial piece of evidence." The lawyer, maintaining his calm demeanour, handed over the law book to the bailiff, who then passed it to the judge. As the judge opened the book to the cited page, his eyes widened slightly, but he kept his composure. There, neatly tucked between the pages, were crisp $2,000 notes. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the judge carefully removed the notes and placed them aside. With a slight smile, he looked over at the lawyer and said, "This is quite an interesting piece of evidence, Counselor." The lawyer remained silent, waiting for the judge's reaction. After a pause, the judge leaned back in his chair and continued, "However, for a case this significant, I believe it would be prudent to consider additional evidence. Please present 2 more pieces of evidence, just like this. 31. A husband and wife were enjoying a quiet moment together when suddenly the doorbell rang. The husband took his time, waiting 5 minutes before finally answering the door. His friend stood there looking amused. "Why did you take so long?" the friend asked with a grin. The husband, trying to keep things light, replied, "We were just making some sauce." The cheeky friend smirked and teased, "Well, why don't you share some of that sauce with us?" Overhearing the conversation, the wife, who had just finished tidying up, couldn't resist joining in. With a playful tone, she called out, "I've already served him and washed the dishes, but if you're so eager, go ahead and lick their spoons. Whatever's left is on his spoon. Feel free to have a taste." One day in class, the teacher asked, "Can anyone tell me the short form of drawstring?" Without missing a beat, little Johnny confidently replied, "PhD." The teacher, a bit surprised, asked, "And what does PhD stand for?" Grinning, Johnny said, "Pajama holding device." A man, curious about the nature of aging, once asked an old man, "When does a man truly become old?" The old man, known for his wisdom and wit, smiled gently, as if recalling a moment that held deep meaning. After a brief pause, he replied, "Son, a man becomes old when his wife, with the same care and trust she's always shown, says to him, 'Drop my friend home, it's getting late.' That's the moment he realizes he's aged." In a bustling neighborhood, a street vendor was loudly advertising an unbelievable offer. "Sit down and eat as much as you want for life for just $7. The commotion quickly attracted the attention of many passers-by, including the mother-in-law of a local family. Curiosity piqued, she turned to her daughter-in-law and said, "This sounds like a fantastic deal. You should go check it out and see what's going on." The daughter-in-law, always eager to help, hurried over to the vendor with excitement. After a short while, she returned looking somewhat puzzled. The mother-in-law, eager to hear the details, asked, "So, what did you find out? Was it really as good as it sounded?" The daughter-in-law took a deep breath and replied, "Well, Mum, it turns out the offer isn't exactly what it seemed. The vendor is selling chairs." One afternoon, the lady of the house appeared unusually upset and distressed. Her usually calm demeanor was replaced with a sense of unease that even the household staff couldn't ignore. After finishing her chores, the maid, Lily, noticed her employer's troubled expression and couldn't help but ask, "Mum, is everything all right? You look so worried. What's troubling you?" With a heavy heart, the lady sighed deeply before replying, "Oh, Lily, I hardly know how to say this, but your boss, my husband, has started an affair with his office secretary." Lily was taken aback by the revelation. Shocked and a bit confused, she quickly responded, "No way, madam, that can't be true. You must be saying this just to tease me, right?" An elderly man found himself in a peculiar situation one day when his wife ran away with the family driver. The news spread quickly through the town, and soon enough, curious neighbors and friends began to approach the old man, eager to hear his reaction. They gathered around him, their faces a mix of concern and intrigue, and asked, "What will you do now?" The old man, however, seemed unfazed by the situation. With a calm demeanor and a slight smile on his face, he paused for a moment before replying, "What can I do? Life goes on, doesn't it? I guess I'll have to drive the car myself now." One evening, in a bid to break their routine, an 88-year-old husband decided to take his young wife to a boxing match. The arena buzzed with excitement as they found their seats, the crowd roaring in anticipation. The bell rang and the fighters stepped into the ring, their muscles tense and ready for action. But just as the match began, within seconds, one of the boxers took a heavy punch and went down, sprawling across the mat. The husband, visibly irritated, leaned back in his seat and scoffed, "Unbelievable! He couldn't even last a minute before hitting the floor. What a waste of a fight!" His wife, who had been quietly observing both the match and her husband's reaction, turned to him with a sly smile. Leaning in closer, She muttered just loud enough for him to hear. "Well, now you know how I feel." The husband chuckled and said, "Well, if it's any consolation, at least he didn't have to live through the rest of the fight like I do." One evening, a man returned home from work feeling a bit mischievous. He decided to play a light-hearted prank on his wife, hoping to catch her off guard. As she was busy in the kitchen, he tiptoed up behind her, carefully placing his hands over her eyes. With a playful tone, he whispered in her ear, "Guess who?" She let out a deep sigh and without hesitation responded, "Oh, come on, your jokes are getting so predictable and old." She paused for a moment, adding a touch of playful sarcasm. "Now seriously, hurry up and get out of here before my husband gets home." One day in the lively common area of a bustling asylum, two patients were engaged in a conversation, sharing stories from their past. One patient, with a nostalgic look, turned to the other and said, "Hey, did I ever tell you about the time I fell off the roof?" The second patient, curious and a bit puzzled, asked, "Really? Were you alive back then?" The first patient paused, scratching their head thoughtfully. "I don't even remember. I was a kid." A blonde husband and his blonde wife were traveling together on a long train journey. They were excited about their trip and settled into their seats, enjoying the scenic views as the train chugged along. As the journey progressed, the wife suddenly looked alarmed and turned to her husband. "Honey, I need to tell you something," she said. "The guy sitting beside me just reached over and put his hand in my pants." The husband, who had been reading a newspaper, looked up with a calm expression. "Oh no, really?" he asked. "What happened next?" The wife, still visibly shaken, replied, "I'm not sure. I was so stunned that I didn't know how to react. I thought maybe you could help me figure out what to do." The husband, staying calm, replied with a grin, "Don't worry, sweetheart. Don't worry, the money is in my pants pocket." One day, a man decided to take his wife to a park for a leisurely afternoon. The park was full of families and couples enjoying the sunny weather. As they strolled along the path, the wife noticed her husband glancing intently at a group of women nearby. Curious, she watched him as he seemed particularly interested in one woman who was chatting and laughing with her friends. After a few moments, she turned to her husband with a puzzled look and said, "I don't understand why you're staring at someone else's wife instead of focusing on me." The husband, with a thoughtful expression, replied, "It's just how the world works. A man doesn't want to see his own mistakes. He prefers to notice someone else's." A blonde woman proudly approached a man and said, "I've developed a special medicine that makes everyone speak the truth." Intrigued, the man asked, "Really? Can I try some?" The woman handed him a small vial, and he took a sip. Almost immediately he exclaimed, "This is nothing but kerosene." The blonde woman smiled brightly and replied, "Exactly. You see, the medicine works perfectly because you just told the truth. It really is just kerosene." A boss asked his blonde secretary to get him a mirror that would clearly show his face. He wanted something that would reflect his image in the best possible way. The secretary, determined to fulfill the request, set out on a quest to find the perfect mirror. She visited numerous stores and markets, examining every mirror she could find. Hours later, as the sun began to set, she returned to the office, clearly worn out from her exhaustive search. The boss, curious and eager, asked, "Did you find the mirror I asked for?" With a sigh of frustration, the blonde secretary replied, "I'm sorry, sir, but I couldn't find a mirror that shows your face clearly. I looked everywhere and even asked for help." The boss, puzzled, asked, "What do you mean you couldn't find one?" The secretary continued, "I found plenty of mirrors, but none of them showed your face. All mirrors reflect my own face." A few days after his wedding, an old man sat down with his friend Bob, looking a bit troubled. Bob noticed his friend's unease and asked, "What's bothering you, buddy?" The old man sighed and said, "It's my wife. She jokes around so much, I just don't know what to do." Bob, curious, asked, "Really? How so?" The old man leaned in and said, Well, yesterday I thought I'd be playful and surprise her. So I covered her eyes from behind and asked, "Guess who?" And do you know what she said? What? Bob inquired, leaning closer. The old man shook his head, chuckling despite himself, and replied, "She said, the milkman." On their wedding night, after the last of the guests had left and the house was finally quiet, the groom and bride found themselves alone in their beautifully decorated bedroom. The groom, wanting to honor the moment with a touch of formality, turned to his bride and asked gently, "Do I have your permission?" The bride, caught slightly off guard by the question, blushed and looked at him with a mix of surprise and amusement. She hadn't anticipated such a traditional gesture on this night, but it also warmed her heart. She looked into his eyes, her own filled with warmth, and with a playful yet sincere tone, she replied, "Oh, my lord, I've never stopped outsiders. You're one of mine." A woman walked into the family planning office with a serious look on her face. She approached the counter and said to the nurse, "I'd like to get the injection, please." The nurse raised an eyebrow, slightly puzzled, and asked, "Certainly, madam. But before we proceed, could you tell me how many children you have?" The woman responded, "I have 12 children." The nurse's eyes widened in surprise. Trying to maintain her professional demeanor but unable to suppress a grin, she said, "Well, with that many kids, you might want to consider something more secure than an injection. Forget the injection. At this point, you might just need a lock on the door instead." The government recently announced a new policy. Anyone with 12 children would be granted a plot of land. The news spread like wildfire, and one man, feeling both hopeful and nervous, approached his wife with a confession. "Listen," he began hesitantly, "we have 7 kids together, but there's something I need to tell you. I have 4 more children from a second wife I've been keeping secret, and there's one more I've never mentioned. If we can cooperate, we could get that land." His wife, though shocked and hurt, reluctantly agreed, seeing the potential benefit. The man quickly gathered 5 of his hidden children and brought them home, eager to complete the family count and claim the land. But when it was time for the final head count, the man noticed something alarming. 4 of the children were missing. Confused and panicked, he turned to his wife and asked, "Where did the other 4 go?" She looked at him with a calm, almost amused expression and said, "Their real dads came and took them back." A woman with a keen eye for antiques was strolling through a quaint little shop when she spotted something extraordinary. The shopkeeper was casually feeding milk to a cat in a bowl that the woman instantly recognized as a rare and ancient Chinese artifact, easily worth at least $30,000. Seeing the priceless bowl being used so carelessly, she couldn't believe her luck. Surely the shopkeeper had no idea of its true value. Feigning disinterest, she approached the counter. "Excuse me, sir," she said with a friendly smile. "That's a lovely cat you have. Would you be willing to sell her to me?" The shopkeeper hesitated, stroking his chin. "Well, she's been with me for a while, but if you really want her, I suppose I could let her go for 50 years. Without a second thought, the woman pulled out the money and handed it over, thrilled at the bargain. As she turned to leave with the cat in her arms, she paused and glanced back casually. Oh, by the way," she added, "I suppose that old bowl won't be of much use to you now. Why don't you just throw it out and I'll need something to feed the cat with after all?" The shopkeeper's eyes twinkled as he grinned knowingly. "Ah, I'm afraid I can't do that, ma'am," he said with a sly smile. "You see, thanks to that bowl, I've sold 300 cats so far." The young lady was enjoying a sunny day at the beach, confidently strolling along in her bikini. As she relaxed on her towel, she couldn't help but notice an old man nearby, staring at her intently. Feeling uncomfortable, she decided to move to a different spot. But to her annoyance, she soon realized the old man had followed her, still staring. Frustrated, she decided to take action and filed a complaint. The case went to court, and the judge asked the old man, "Sir, why were you staring at this young woman?" The old man, without missing a beat, responded, Your Honour, I was just being polite. I only looked at the parts she had covered. One sunny afternoon in a bustling household, the maid approached her employer with an unusual request. She held out a shirt, neatly folded with a hint of hesitation in her voice. "Madam, please, could you take this shirt back?" Surprised, the lady of the house looked at her with curiosity. "Why, didn't you like it? It's one of my favourites," she replied, raising an eyebrow. The maid, trying to suppress a smile, responded, "Oh no, madam, the shirt is absolutely gorgeous. It's just that, well, there's a small issue." The lady leaned in, intrigued. "Whenever I wear it, something odd happens. The boss doesn't seem to notice me at all. It's as if I'm invisible. He completely ignores me, thinking I'm you, just going about my work." The lady chuckled. "That doesn't seem so bad." The maid sighed, continuing, "But that's not all. The driver, well, let's just say he's gotten a bit too comfortable. Every time I'm wearing it, he always sneaks up from behind and lies down, thinking it's you." One night, little Johnny was deep in his studies with his teacher, diligently working on his homework. The clock on the wall ticked away, and the teacher glanced at it with concern. Noticing how late it was getting, she asked, "Isn't it getting late? What's the time now?" Johnny, always one to find a creative solution, thought for a moment. Instead of simply checking the time, he picked up a small stone from the ground outside the window. With a mischievous grin, he threw the stone at the house across the street. The stone hit the side of the house with a gentle thud, and soon enough, an old woman emerged from the house, clearly annoyed. She looked around and, seeing Johnny and his teacher, shouted, "You rascals, it's already 2 a.m. Go to sleep!" A man known for his large frame found himself in a terrifying situation one day when he accidentally fell from the top of a tall building. The fall was tremendous, and as he plummeted toward the ground, onlookers gasped in horror. The impact was so great that everything around the crash site was left in chaos. Hours later, the man slowly regained consciousness in the hospital, his body aching from the fall. Dazed and confused, he looked around, trying to make sense of what had happened. A doctor was standing by his bedside, monitoring his condition closely. With a shaky voice, the man asked, "Am I alive?" The doctor, though relieved that the man had survived such a fall, couldn't hide a hint of irony in his response. He replied, "You're alive, but the people you fell on died." One afternoon, a blonde sat at a table, carefully holding a light bulb in one hand and a marker in the other. She was focused, diligently writing something on the smooth glass surface of the bulb. As she worked, a curious friend walked by and noticed what she was doing. Intrigued, the friend stopped and asked, "What are you doing?" Without missing a beat, the blonde looked up with a proud smile and replied, "I'm making my father's name bright." One afternoon, a beggar approached a large, elegant house, hoping for some kindness. He knocked on the door and called out, "Please give something." The lady of the house, known for her generosity, answered the door, but today her face reflected a mix of weariness and regret. With a polite but firm tone, she said, "I'm sorry, we don't have anything to give today. Please forgive us." The beggar, rather than leaving disappointed, looked at her with a gentle smile. His eyes sparkled with a hint of mischief as he responded, "All right then, just give me your number. I'll pray for you and send a message too." One afternoon, little Johnny was happily taking a bath in his backyard, splashing around without a care in the world. Just as he was enjoying his time, a beautiful girl from the neighborhood happened to walk by and accidentally caught a glimpse of him. The innocent mishap quickly spread through the neighborhood, and before long, it became the talk of the town. Concerned, the matter was brought before the community elder, who acted as the local judge. Little Johnny, feeling both embarrassed and flustered, stood before the judge, his cheeks flushing. "Judge, that girl saw me while I was bathing," he exclaimed, clearly upset. The judge, trying to maintain order and calm the situation, asked, "So, Johnny, what do you want me to do about it?" Johnny hesitated for a moment. Then, with determination in his voice, he replied, I want to see her in the same condition now. Judge fainted. At 16, the mental asylum was getting full, and they had to discharge some patients. The psychiatrist devised a simple test to see which patients had recovered enough to return to society. He assembled all patients and drew a door on a chalkboard. He then announced that whoever was able to open that door would be released from the asylum. Chaos broke out. The patients began running and fighting to be first to the chalkboard. They began to push, kick, scratch, and even bite the door. Disappointed, the psychiatrist was about to give up when he saw a patient calmly standing next to the wall. Hopefully, he approached the patient and asked him, "Why aren't you rushing to the door?" The patient replied, "I'm not so mad as the rest to rush to it. There's no way they can open it." The psychiatrist asked him, "Why's that?" The patient replied, "I have the key." On a frigid winter night, the power had gone out in a quaint village home, leaving the house shrouded in darkness. There was a knock on the door. Trembling, she called out, her voice quivering. "Who's there?" A man's voice replied, "It's your husband, Bob." Her heart raced as panic surged through her. Her breath hitched, and her eyes widened in shock. "Oh no," she gasped. "If it's you, then who's inside?" In the office, one colleague noticed his friend's phone buzzing incessantly with "I love you" messages. Curiosity getting the better of him, he asked, "Hey, what's with all the I love you texts? Are you in the middle of some romantic adventure?" The friend chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, you wouldn't believe it," he said with a grin. "I accidentally grabbed my wife's phone this morning instead of mine." In a lively grammar class, the teacher decided to test her students' understanding of tenses. She looked around the room, and her eyes landed on little Johnny, who was known for his quick wit and mischievous nature. With a smile, she said, "All right, little Johnny, let's see if you can handle this one. Here's the sentence. Today my wedding took place with great celebration. Now can you turn that sentence from the past tense into the future tense?" The room went silent and everyone turned to see what Johnny would come up with. He leaned back in his chair, a playful glint in his eye, and after a brief moment, he sat up straight and confidently replied, "Sure, miss. Tonight you're going to get a big thrashing with even more celebration." One afternoon, a man approached an elderly gentleman with a concerned look on his face. "I have something to tell you," he said, lowering his voice. "I just saw your young wife at the park meeting someone who looked like one of your friends." The old man's eyes widened with alarm. His mind raced as he imagined the worst. Without another word, he bolted towards the park, determined to catch his wife in the act of what he feared might be a secret rendezvous. After a frantic search through the park, he finally returned home, his face flushed with anger and frustration. He stormed up to the man who had given him the troubling news and said, "You're making me crazy. I went to the park and my wife doesn't have any friends. The person she was with wasn't anyone I know." A husband and wife were in the midst of a particularly heated argument. The wife, exasperated by the constant bickering, said, "You know how much my voice bothers you? Well, I've decided you won't have to hear it at all anymore." The husband, taken aback and somewhat confused, asked, "Oh, are you planning on becoming mute?" With a determined look, the wife replied, "No, I'm going to make you deaf." After a lively night at a party, a husband and wife were making their way home. The atmosphere in the car was relaxed, filled with the echoes of the evening's laughter. But suddenly, the wife's voice cut through the quiet, her tone filled with urgency. "There's a wall ahead. Stop the car, there's a wall ahead. I'm telling you to stop the car." Her panic grew with each word, but the car didn't slow down. In a split second, the inevitable happened. The car crashed head-on into the wall. The impact was loud, and before they knew it, they were surrounded by the chaotic blur of emergency lights and sirens. The next day, the couple found themselves lying side by side in hospital beds, both bruised and bandaged, but thankfully alive. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the unspoken tension of what had happened. Finally, the wife turned to her husband, her face a mix of frustration and confusion. "When I was yelling for so long that there was a wall ahead, why didn't you stop the car?" The husband looked at her with tears welling up in his eyes, his voice choked with emotion. "Madam," he whispered, "it was you driving the car, not me." One bright afternoon in the local park, an elderly man was taking his usual stroll, enjoying the peaceful surroundings. As he passed by a row of trees, something unusual caught his eye. A lovely young blonde woman, dressed in a loose, flowing dress, was hanging upside down from a sturdy tree branch. Her long hair cascaded toward but to the ground, and her dress fluttered gently in the breeze. The sight was so unexpected that the old man stopped in his tracks, rubbing his eyes to make sure he wasn't seeing things. Curiosity got the better of him, and he walked closer to get a better look. As he approached, he couldn't help but ask, "What on earth are you doing up there?" The blonde woman, completely unbothered by her upside-down position, looked at the old man and smiled sweetly. "Oh, it's quite simple," she said matter-of-factly. "I took a headache pill earlier, but I'm hanging upside down to make sure the pill doesn't end up in my stomach." One evening, a woman was at home alone when she was suddenly attacked by a masked thug. The intruder quickly overpowered her, looted her belongings, and took advantage of her in the most despicable way. Shaken and distraught, the woman managed to gather herself after the ordeal and went to the local police station to file a complaint. As she sat in front of the officer, trembling and trying to recount the harrowing experience, the officer listened attentively, taking down all the details. After she had finished explaining what happened, the officer looked up from his notes and asked her, "Do you suspect any local boys? Could it have been someone from the neighborhood?" The woman, though still visibly shaken, responded with surprising certainty, "No, officer. This was definitely done by someone from outside the neighborhood." Intrigued by her confidence, the officer leaned in and asked, "How can you be so sure about that? What makes you think it wasn't a local?" She met the officer's gaze, her voice steady despite the trauma she had just endured, and answered with unexpected candor, "Because no one in the neighborhood has, well, a fuse that big." One day an old man came home, his mind preoccupied with the usual worries of life, when he noticed something strange. The house was eerily quiet. As he walked through the rooms, it became clear that his wife was nowhere to be found. He then discovered a note left on the kitchen table. The words scrawled in a hurry made his heart sink. "I've run away with your friend Bob." For a moment, the old man just stood there, trying to process what had happened. Bob, his longtime friend, had betrayed him, and his wife had left him without a second thought. Anger and disbelief swirled within him, but life had to go on. 3 days passed, each one filled with a mix of resentment and sorrow. Then, one afternoon, as he was sitting in his chair trying to read, he heard the sound of the front door creaking open. To his astonishment, his wife walked in as if nothing had happened. Furious, the old man jumped up and confronted her. "What have you come back for now? After running away with Bob, how dare you return here?" His wife, remarkably calm and seemingly unfazed by his anger, looked him straight in the eyes and said, "I forgot my charger, I've come to get it." If you're still here, I'm thrilled you enjoyed the joke. Subscribing is a simple way to stay connected. Join our community and make me a happy friend.